When it came to the video game characters and franchises that I grew up with in my youth, they were mostly on the PlayStation consoles, and those were Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. But in the middle of all that, there was another game that really sparked my interest, and that was Banjo-Kazooie. It is rather interesting that a beloved franchise like this has only gotten 5 games. Well, 6 if you count Diddy Kong Racing. So in this video, I'll be talking about my personal experiences about all of the Banjo-Kazooie games that I've played. It all started when a friend of mine had a VHS that promoted the game, showing off all the levels and such. He already had the game, so he felt like giving the VHS to me, and I'm still surprised that I still have that old thing with me. After I watched it, I really wanted to play it. So yeah, Banjo-Kazooie was the reason why I wanted a Nintendo 64. And it was the first game I ever played on that console, too. The levels were huge and wonderful, the characters were memorable with their designs and amusing personality. It was a great time for me playing those old collectathon games you don't see anymore. The worlds I enjoyed the most were Treasure Trove Cove, Clanker's Cavern, Gobi's Valley, and Mad Monster Mansion. The only ones that I didn't care for that much back then was Bubble Gloop Swamp and Rusty Bucket Bay, mostly because of the infamous engine room segment. Then, of course, there was all of the secrets that they had in the game, like Stop and Swap and Bottles' puzzle minigame. I didn't know any of this until years later. The puzzle minigame was fun and also unlocked special cheats to change the player with different designs, which are pretty amusing. And, of course, I eventually found out about the full history about Stop and Swap, and that you can still collect all the eggs in the ice key in the first game by typing in very long cheat codes. And then after you collect them all, there's pretty much no purpose but bragging rights in the original. On the 360 version, they unlock special content for the 360 versions of Banjo-Tooie and Nuts and Bolts, but we'll get to that later. So anyway, this game has some great platforming as well as some special secrets, and I love it. So yeah, Banjo-Kazooie was a great game, and then Banjo-Tooie came and made it even better. So many new worlds, so many new moves, it was all great. It was all big and new, and maybe a little bit too big. It does take a while to travel from one level to the other. Well, that is unless you have the fast banjo cheat on. Glitter Gulch Mine, Witchy World, and Jolly Roger's Lagoon are probably some of my favorite levels in the game. The one that I didn't care for that much was Grunty Industries, cause yeah, that factory just feels like a frickin' maze. And of course, we had Canary Mary. Yeah, that bitch with those finger-breaking races she puts you through. The one in the mine carts are okay once you get the hang of it, but then she becomes almost impossible to beat once you race her in Cloud Cuckoo Land. But yeah, don't have much to say about the sequel that hasn't already been said. It took what was great in the first game and added some more good things to play around with. Years later, we would get Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge on the Game Boy Advance. I will admit, I was surprised and alienated in seeing a Banjo game on the handheld for the first time. Back then, I didn't think much about it since it was a short game, but nowadays, I actually like it. It looks and plays like a Banjo game, collecting Jiggies, Jinjos, and all those other things. And yeah, it's a short game, but then again, it's a handheld game. There's not much to expect out of it. It's also interesting that this game actually takes place after the first game and before the second game. So yeah, it's canon even though most people would deny it. And Gruntilda just looks badass in that Mecha Grunty suit. Which is interesting when you think about it. For a witch who knows all these magical spells and whatnot, she tends to heavily rely on machines to defeat Banjo-Kazooie. But yeah, Grunty's Revenge. For what it is, it's a decent game. And then came Banjo Pilot, the first spin-off racing game on the Game Boy Advance, and the only Banjo game that I consider to be the worst out of the Banjo franchise. Originally, the game was going to be a follow-up to Diddy Kong Racing known as Diddy Kong Pilot. But after Microsoft bought them, the game had to be reworked into a Banjo Pilot, and yeah, even if you play the game, you can clearly tell that this was meant to be a Diddy Kong Racing game. You collect trophies and ribbons, unlock special content from Cheeto the Spellbook, and that sounds all fine and dandy, if the game wasn't way too easy to beat. Sure, there are some tough spots here and there, but once you unlock Bottles, then you can unlock everything within a day. He's like the most overpowered racer in the game. So yeah, Banjo Pilot, very lousy game, and I'm sure it wouldn't make much difference if this was originally Diddy Kong Pilot. So many years later, Rare eventually announced a new Banjo game on the consoles, and I was super excited for it, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. That is, until they announced what system it was going to be for. Yeah, the minor changes didn't piss me off. The different style of gameplay didn't piss me off. What really pissed me off was that the game was only available for the Xbox 360. I waited almost 10 years for this game to come out, and yet it's on a system that I have no interest in. Yeah, I was really bummed out about that. 5 years after the game was released, I had to watch over my sister's apartment for a month while she and her husband were off in the UK, and wouldn't you know it, they have a 360 console. So the first thing I did when I got there was that I rushed over to the local GameStop store, bought nuts and bolts, and spent half of the month playing and beating the game. And I already knew what to expect from it, and I didn't care. I didn't care about the minor redesigns, I didn't care about the vehicles, I didn't care about the different style of gameplay and everything. I just wanted to play a new Banjo game. Hell, I'd be up for it if they decided to make a Banjo-Kazooie RPG game. So yeah, I really enjoyed finally playing this game after all these years. Although it took me a while to get used to the controls since, well, this was the first time I've played a Xbox 360 game in my life. The worlds were fun to explore. Obviously, Banjoland is one of my favorites, next to Nutty Acres and Logbox 720. It also has some very useful glitches, like the floating car trick and the barricade glitch. There are also a lot of events and challenges in the game, whether you have the standard race around the track event, or protect the MacGuffin from the enemies, or the fetch quests that are kind of like the old collectathon days of the classic Banjo games. There are some that I enjoyed and some that I found annoying, but it was mostly because I didn't have the right parts to make a proper car back then. While the characters look slightly different, the personalities and the writing are still humorous and witty as ever. That, and you get to run over Grunty with your standard car in Showdown Town. Oh, that never gets old. I did manage to beat the game, but I didn't beat it 100%, cause I pretty much figured nothing special would happen if I beat it 100%. It feels like those kind of tropes in video games died off years ago. I didn't unlock all the special cosmetics from Stop and Swap simply because I didn't have time to beat the 360 versions of Kazooie and Tooie. But I have seen them, and they look cool, like Fuzzy Dice, Googly Eyes, Roy Steen, and Mrs. Bottles's decapitated head. Okay, that last one is just bizarre. I guess Evil Bottles still lives in one form or another. And then, of course, there was the Logs Lost Challenges, but I didn't play that simply because I completely forgotten all about that DLC. So in the end, I felt satisfied for finally playing this game, and I wish I could play it again. It's also surprising that the big mainstream critics were very positive towards this game, while everybody else was the exact opposite. Yeah, and this kind of thing wouldn't happen again until The Good Dinosaur came out. And that completes my retrospective on Banjo-Kazooie. I really enjoyed playing all of them, well, except for Banjo Pilot. If there ever was a new Banjo game to come out, then I'd be open to whatever they release, whether it's a return to the classics or something new. That's about it for this retrospective, so I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, I guess I better talk about Yooka-Laylee, otherwise people are gonna be pestering the hell out of me for not mentioning it. So yeah, Yooka-Laylee, the upcoming spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, made by former Rareware employees. It's a game that interests me and scares me at the same time. What interests me is that it's the return of 3D platforming, and seeing as how most home consoles tend to overdo it with first-person shooters, and Steam just likes to pollute itself with all of these 2D retro throwbacks, just seeing a still image of the gameplay just feels like a breath of fresh air to me. Of course, they also recently announced that Shovel Knight will make a special guest appearance in the game, which was cool. And the thing that scares me about this game is the hype. Ever since this game was announced on Kickstarter back in 2015, there has been a massive overdose of hype, fan art, and even fan-made videos. Yeah, all of that dedicated to a video game that hasn't even been released yet. So it feels like this game will be going down the route of not living up to its hype when it's released. And we've already had that happen before with other games, like Armacrog, the spiritual successor to the Neverhood Chronicles, and it was met with mixed reviews. And then we had Mighty Number 9, the spiritual successor to Mega Man, and, well, we all know what happened to that game. But if that doesn't happen, then there's still the second route. And by second route, I mean that the game's gonna get the Five Nights at Freddy's and Undertale treatment with its fanbase. But either way, I'll give this game a go once it's released onto Steam and all that. Okay, now I'm done doing this whole retrospective thing, so Yeah, bye.